the amendment.
Amodei Amendment 013 to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to the committee print by Mr. Amodei of Nevada.
I recognize the gentleman from Nevada, Mr. Amodei, for the purpose of offering an amendment to the ANS to the committee print designated Amodei number 013. Without objection, the amendment is considered read.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment deals with the sale of public land in Nevada and Utah. The Utah provisions start on page 23, and I will defer at the appropriate time to my colleague from Utah, Ms. Malloy, to go over the Utah sections. With respect to the Nevada ones, Nevada population centers are all encumbered by federal land that can't meet their housing and development needs without disposal of federal lands. Unlike most other states, Nevadans rely on Congress to make these lands available. Indeed, the federal government owns over 80% of the land in Nevada. Each of the maps included in this amendment were generated by the respective 4 counties referenced in the bill and introduced at their request. All disposal of federal lands included in this amendment are still subject to the NEPA process and does not bypass existing federal regulation. Much of the land included in this amendment is subject to joint selection by the Secretary of Interior and the respective 4 counties. Land is also subject to local planning and zoning regulations. In the first 2 years of President Trump's first administration, 1,100 acres of SNPLMA, that's Southern Nevada Public Lands Management Act, were offered for sale in the Las Vegas Valley. Of that, only 728 acres sold, but for a total of $1,036,607. The average sale price per acre was at $187,000. Of Nevada's total land mass, over 70,000 acres, this would shrink the size of the federal estate in Nevada by 0.7%. This is a Nevada-centric amendment drafted and requested by Nevadans. The CBO has scored provisions of this bill and estimates that this amendment would generate billions in federal revenue. The continued federal ownership of the land identified in this amendment would cost taxpayers for continued maintenance and the payment of PILT, payment in lieu of taxes, dollars. The disposal of this land would allow for more responsible development while giving a positive return to the American taxpayer. The lands included in this amendment were also identified by the respective counties in Nevada and Utah for disposal and will generate future revenues to the state and local governments once developed. I would now defer to my colleague from Utah for the presentation of her part of the bill, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, the underlying bill before this committee today generates revenue from numerous federal assets, from oil and gas sale leases for both onshore and offshore to other federal fees to be paid, all of which will bring revenue to the Treasury for debt and deficit reduction. Naturally, it makes sense to also look at federal assets that can generate revenue from other non-mineral related federal lands. And we can do this without impacting any specially designated lands or other conservation related lands. Not all federal lands have the same value. Some should not be available for disposal. We all agree on that. However, in both Democratic and Republican administrations, for decades, we've been disposing of appropriate lands in a manner that's consistent with what I propose to do here. This has taken place in the Biden, Trump, Obama, Bush, and Clinton administrations. This provision identifies specific lands where we can generate revenue in locations that are appropriate, that will also generate a strong financial yield to the Treasury due to local growth, and will do so while serving community public purposes by selling targeted parcels for fair market value to local government entities for infrastructure needs. Washington County, home to the city of St. George in southwest Utah in my district, is one of the fastest growing counties in the country. The influx of new residents, many from out of state, has significantly driven up housing demand. The median property value rose by almost 12% in just 2023. Because this is a desert region, Washington County is also proactively responding to the increasing pressures of water resources and water use. Many of the difficulties we face at a local level are of course related to the fact that the county is surrounded by federal land. Approximately 82% of the county is federally managed, mostly BLM. The high percentage of federal lands impacts the local government's ability to work on economic and transportation development, manage natural resources, and fully take advantage of recreational activities. Due to these challenges, I've offered an amendment with my colleague that selects over 60 targeted regional parcels totaling a little over 10,000 acres to be conveyed to the Water District, the City of St. George, and Washington County at fair market value. I could run through all the parcels. I don't know that anybody wants to take the time to do that today. They've got the information in front of them, but the net impact will be to reduce the federal debt and deficit through fair market value sales of targeted lands needed by local governments for infrastructure, and the impact will be to 1/3% of the federal land in the state. And with that, I yield back to my colleague from Nevada.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentlemen's time's expired. Does any member, is there further discussion on the amendment? Mr. Neguse, you're recognized.
I thank the chairman. A couple of quick questions. I mean, one, I would just say more broadly, for the better part of the last 11 hours, I suppose, we've been making the case here on this side of the aisle, 13 hours. I stand corrected that the Republican reconciliation bill plans to sell off our public lands. Lo and behold, at 11 o'clock, we finally get an amendment that does precisely what we said this bill would do. But I get the question I have, very simple one, and I think I know the answer from Ms. Malloy, but I'm not so sure about Mr. Amodei. Ms. Malloy, do you represent the areas in this bill in Utah, Washington County, and St. George that you're would like to have those lands conveyed?
I do.
Okay, thank you. And this isn't meant to be a gotcha. I'm actually trying to, you all propose this amendment, so considering it. Mr. Amodei, do you represent Clark County?
I do not represent Clark County, but I have been asked by the Clark County Commission to introduce the bill on their behalf as a member of the majority in the House of Representatives.
So you, just to be clear, for all of your Republican colleagues, because I've sat on this dais year after year and been lectured by my colleagues on the other side of the aisle about how important it is to engage your colleagues who represent areas that may be at issue in a particular bill. You don't represent Clark County. There are multiple other Nevada representatives who do. Mr. Horsford represents this area. Ms. Lee represents this area. Ms. Titus represents this area. And I don't think that we should proceed in considering the amendment until we've had an opportunity to hear from them about whether or not they believe that these lands ought to be conveyed. I think that's a fair request. I think you'd feel the same way if any number of the counties that you represent in Western Nevada were at issue in this bill. Is that an unreasonable request?
Well, I don't know how it works in Colorado, sir, but I can tell you in Nevada, we all talk frequently, and this is not going to come as a surprise to any of them. And please feel free to consult them.
They support this?
In the manner you see fit.
They support this amendment?
They are aware of
They're aware of it?
Don't put words in my mouth.
I'm asking you. I'm not putting words. I'm asking you. I'm saying, are they supportive of this amendment? You haven't asked your colleagues in Nevada whether or not they support the conveyance of land in their district, not yours?
The answer to your question is no.
Yeah. Well, I think it is deeply irresponsible to put forward an amendment. And I don't take issue, by the way. I might have disagreements on the merits with Ms. Malloy with respect to the amendment, but I understand her desire on behalf of her constituents to move forward with this amendment. But I would think at a minimum, Mr. Amodei, that you would do your colleagues in Nevada the courtesy of at least striking that language regarding Clark County. Engage with your three other colleagues before this gets to the floor and then have a conversation with them. But to basically say to them that they have no say as to what happens with respect to land conveyances in their congressional districts, I think it's a slippery slope. And I would hope that my colleagues and Mr. Chairman in particular, I would hope that you would consider that as you weigh this amendment. I really, in good faith, I would hope that you would consider at least striking that provision so that you can give those other members of Congress an opportunity to weigh in here, at least be heard, as opposed to an 11 o'clock p.m. last minute amendment that they're just finding out about right now as we're texting them. I don't think that's the way to do business in the House. And I would implore the chairman to consider striking that language. I yield to the ranking member.
I have a question for the chairman because in a recent article in E&E News, he said this, and I quote, "I have made things clear. There are some things I won't do. I will never bend on the Constitution, and I won't bend on selling our public lands." That's Chairman Bruce Westerman, very recently in E&E News. So, Mr. Chairman, are you bending now?
Like
That
somebody's on the bender.
silence sounds like the sound of bending.
Maybe a bender in the back.
Well,
I yield back.
I'll reclaim my time, and I guess, Mr. Chairman, if you'll just entertain my request on behalf of Ms. Lee and Mr. Horsford and Ms. Titus, all of whom, by the way, Mr. Chairman, as you know, have served as members of this committee in particular. They served with you in the past. If you would consider striking this language so that you give them an opportunity to weigh in. Mr. Chairman, it's a serious question. I don't think it's an unreasonable request to make.
Gentlemen's time's expired. Chairman. Mr. McClintock, you're
I'm
recognized.
reminded of a story that goes back to the days of the very colorful Millicent Fenwick. In those days, if you changed a vote on the floor, you were required not only to change the vote, but you also had to provide a reason. Millicent Fenwick rises one day to say that she changes her vote on HR whatever. There's a pause, and the presiding officer says, "Mrs. Fenwick, you need to provide a reason." There's another pause, and she says, "Well, I changed my mind." Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Ms. Ledger Fernandez, you're recognized.
Yeah,
Ranking member of the Public Land Subcommittee.
Yeah, again, I would just say, and thank you, Ms. Ledger Fernandez, for yielding the time. And as she mentioned, I do serve as a ranking member of the Federal Land Subcommittee. Maybe a laughing matter to Mr. McClintock now. Majorities come and go. I look forward to introducing a bill without any notice to Mr. McClintock on the disposition of public lands in his district. Good to know that's the new standard in the House Natural
Well,
Resources
Mr. Huff
Committee.
has
I
done
don't-
that on many occasions already, so you're not
I've
setting
never
a
done
new
that in his
precedent.
district, and I certainly intend to, now that I know
Can
that
you
that's-
say Auburn
that that's-
Dam?
What was that? I don't know what dam he's talking about, but anyway, my point remains one and the same, which is there's not a member on the other side of the aisle. And Chairman Tiffany, I would hope that you would speak on this, given that you're the chair of the Federal Land Subcommittee, and given that this has been the precedent that we've applied in the subcommittee on bill after bill after bill that we've heard, that members have an opportunity to be heard when the lands are being disposed of in their districts. I just don't, that's not an unreasonable position to take, and I don't understand why the chairman of the subcommittee or the chairman of the full committee on, again,
Gentlemen, yield.
I would, of course.
Gentlemen, yield. Save the outrage, because I've seen it in my own state, by members on your side of the aisle. Save the outrage. They've done it to me, and take your whining someplace else. I yield back.
Mr. Tiffany, what I would say to you, with all respect, I don't believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that a markup of this nature has been held in which you have been told, without even participating in that particular hearing, that lands in your congressional district would be conveyed or disposed of or protected. I suspect that that's the latter of which is what you'd object to, but nonetheless, putting that aside, I cannot point to a precedent. And I really, anyway.